Today we're diving into one of the most important topics for anybody considering a move to the UAE. The different visa routes that are available, how they work, and what people need to know before they start the process. By way of introduction, I'm Aideen Hopkins. I'm the Operations Director and co-owner at EER Middle East, and I'm delighted to be joined by my colleague Kelly Labuschagne, an expert in UAE immigration who supports individuals and companies across the UAE. So we're going to break this down into three main visa categories. We have employment visas, self-sponsorship programs, and additional visa types such as freelance, remote work, and mission visas. So let's get started. So Kelly, the UAE has been experiencing significant annual population growth. And in particular in Dubai, we've seen that they have added over 200,000 a year over the last couple of years in terms of new residents. And I think that's largely made up of skilled professionals, investors, entrepreneurs, as well as more recently we're seeing more retirees and that entering into the UAE. And I think this year our population here in Dubai has exceeded 4 million. So we've seen record growth. So anybody, listening, what would the process be when somebody, let's say they decide to set up a company in order to be able to obtain an employment visa? Can you talk us through that process, please?
Sure. Well, first we would need to understand which emirate the business has been established. A lot of people don't know, but the UAE consists of 7 different emirates, and within each emirate you have many different jurisdictions. You have your mainland and multiple free zone jurisdictions. Each jurisdiction will have its own rules and regulations when it comes to employment visa processing.
Okay, so maybe we can look at that. For example, we have mainland and we have the free zones. What are the major differences when it comes to processing of visas?
Sure. So firstly, looking at free zone jurisdictions, each jurisdiction will have access to their own online portal. I like to refer to the portal as the dictionary of your employees. The portal is used to process all new employment visa applications, sometimes dependent visas, as well as your work permits, as well as a lot of different salary certificates for your employees. When you look at the mainland jurisdiction, you have the Ministry of Labour, which is an additional step for the work permit application for all employees, and then you have the extra step of immigration.
Okay, so there's differences then, as you say, between the mainland and the free zone jurisdictions. Does that also mean that the timescales are longer for one over the other? Or even within free zones, are there some that will process the visas faster than others?
Yeah, so this is different not only across jurisdictions, but also across emirates. If we look at Abu Dhabi as an example, whether you're based in the free zone or in the mainland, there's no option to do express visa applications. In Dubai, as an emirate, certain free zone jurisdictions do offer express visa services. This will reduce the processing time for both the visa as well as the work permit. And this is not available within all jurisdictions.
Okay, and then, so, we're looking at an entrepreneur who has set up a business and, once that business has been established, they are going to go and obtain an employment visa. What are the compliance matters they need to take into account? For example, I'm thinking about medical insurance or WPS. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so normally when doing an assessment call with our clients, we always first understand the emirate and the jurisdiction because each one has its own rules and regulations. If we look at Abu Dhabi as an example, although medical insurance is mandatory for employers to provide to all their employees, not all jurisdictions require proof of this medical insurance for the visa application. Looking at Abu Dhabi as an emirate, you have to provide that proof upon visa issuance. So normally the first few steps of the visa application are key to apply for the medical insurance. And once that insurance has been issued, can you then only apply for the visa to be issued? So this will be very important when considering the timeline for the visa application, as this is key for especially employees that need to sponsor dependents. WPS, which is the Wages Protection Scheme, is mandatory across all mainland jurisdictions countrywide, and only select free zones have actually started onboarding the WPS requirement.
Okay, great. Okay, and if we move on then and we look at individuals who are coming in as employees, which is probably the majority of expats that move here, they're coming under that corporate sponsorship, if you like. What does that journey look like for them? If you can take us through it, please.
Sure. So once the employee receives their initial offer of employment, which is an internal contract, this contract is then accepted by the employee, and then we can formally start the visa application process. If we're looking at a free zone entity, the application process is submitted in the online portal, which will then trigger the next steps of the visa application. If it's a mainland entity, the first step would be the employment contract issued directly from the Ministry of Labour. Once that employment contract has been signed and uploaded, we then look at the entry visa or e-visa that will be issued. If the employee is outside the country, then they will use this visa to enter the country as their change of status. If the individual is already inside the country, we would then apply for a manual change of status. Once the change of status has been issued, we can then proceed and have the individual complete the medical fitness test. The medical and fitness test will include both a blood test as well as an x-ray. Mm-hmm. Once the medical test has been completed, if it's in a jurisdiction where proof of medical insurance is mandatory for visa issuance, we can then apply for the medical insurance. And once a medical insurance has been issued, we can then issue the residence visa and apply for the Emirates ID application for the individual to complete the biometrics. Once the biometrics has been completed, then within a few working days, the Emirates ID will be delivered. And then if the individual has a requirement to sponsor any dependents, it's at this point of time that we can start to do that.
Okay. Now, we talked about the job title. So there'll be certain titles that are skills. So you might have managerial titles, director level or technical roles. Those will require an education certificate, a degree document, which will need to be attested. Now, if for some reason they didn't have a degree and they've worked their way up, they're in a more senior stage of life and they're taking a senior position, having worked their way up through the company, is there a way for them to be able to get a visa without having an attested degree?
I actually get asked this question quite a lot. It's not unusual for someone to start at the bottom and work their way through the corporate ladder, or that never went to a tertiary education but are working in senior roles. So the attested education certificate is not mandatory for the visa to be issued. Mm-hmm. However, in most jurisdictions, it will determine the job title that is on the work permit and the residence visa. So what the Ministry of Labour does is they take job titles and they group them in different categories, and then they categorize that based on the level of education that you require to qualify. So if you look at director or manager job titles, that normally requires an attested bachelor's degree. Assistant managers generally require an attested diploma. And then you have what we refer to as unskilled job titles that don't require an attested education certificate. Mm-hmm. Now, that does not mean that someone that has a lower job title cannot work in their certain skilled profession.
Okay. And I presume if we think about it, when it comes to family sponsorship and looking after your dependents, by not having a skilled job title, could that have an impact on your ability to sponsor your children?
No, it doesn't. In the UAE, we look at the salary to determine whether or not someone can qualify to sponsor their dependents.
So, Kelly, for clients who come and ask you what are the key things that they as employers or their employees should consider when it comes to the visa sponsorship, what do you advise?
Sure. So if it's a newly established company, I normally recommend to them that they should start seeking local medical insurance providers, as the medical insurance is a key factor to the visa processing timelines, especially if your employee is new to the UAE. If you are relocating an employee that is new to the country, then things they need to consider is, are they sponsoring any dependents, as proof of relationship documents would need to be attested for them to sponsor their dependents. If they have a tertiary education, then we would need to attest those documents too for the job titles. And then also, we normally always recommend that an employee would do an outside country application, as this will reduce the amount of time for the visa application inside country, which will then reduce the amount of time for the Emirates ID to be delivered, which is key to them settling in and being able to sponsor their dependents.
Okay, so if we have somebody that's already here and they hold a residence visa, perhaps they're sponsored by their spouse, how does a work permit only application work for them?
Sure. So a lot of individuals don't actually know this, but a work permit and a residence visa are completely separate. So although you already reside inside the country with a sponsored residence visa, that only gives you the right to live, and your employer would still need to apply for a work permit, which would be attached to your residence visa, which will then give you the right to work. That work permit is processed under the employer. So if it's a free zone jurisdiction, it'll be processed through their online portal. And if it's a mainland jurisdiction, it'll be processed directly through the Ministry of Labour. That work permit would always have a job title, which would be subject to your attested education certificate, and you'll always have your linked salary.
Okay. And are there any benefits for employers in providing a work permit only rather than the full residency?
The main benefit here would be that you wouldn't incur the additional cost of the residence visa that you would for a sponsored employee, but all other benefits such as providing medical insurance would still be required.
But in relation to that medical insurance, if you're hiring somebody that's sponsored by their spouse and they have medical insurance from the spouse's company, for example, then the employer wouldn't have to provide medical insurance in that instance, would they?
Yes, that's correct. The UAE only entitles an individual to have one active medical insurance per person.
Okay, you touched earlier on dependent visa sponsorship. So can you talk us through what the current requirements are for sponsoring dependents, such as a spouse, children, or even parents?
Of course. So first, I'd like to mention that there are different visa categories that give you the right to sponsor dependents. Since we've been specifically looking at employment visa holders, I will go on the requirements for employment visa holders to sponsor their dependents. Most importantly, you need to have a minimum salary of 5,000 dirhams. You would need to ensure that you have the correct relationship documents attested to show proof of relationship, such as your marriage certificate, your children's birth certificates. You would then need to hold an active tenancy agreement. You would then need a salary certificate from your employer, as well as your formal employment contract.
Okay. And, do the rules differ, let's say, between Dubai and Abu Dhabi when it comes to dependent sponsorship?
Yes. So Abu Dhabi has recently implemented a new requirement that Abu Dhabi issued visa holders must submit a Talfiq, which is an Abu Dhabi issued tenancy contract, in order to be able to sponsor their dependents. Whereas Dubai and other Emirates, just an active tenancy contract would be accepted. There's no specific requirement that it be issued from the same Emirate.
Okay. And, if we're looking at the sponsorship of children, for example, and if parents are divorced maybe, or a parent is deceased, or even children are adopted, are there additional requirements or documents needed in order to be able to sponsor those children?
Yes, so what we need to note here, which is important, is we just need to show proof of relationship to support the dependent visa application. Normally in the UAE, they would prefer that the father be the one that sponsors the dependent visas if you're sponsoring children. And you would need to show proof that the mother has a residence visa if the father is not also sponsoring the mother with the children. In a case where the mother is sponsoring the children, then we would just need to submit a no objection letter from the father to support the application. If the father or the mother is deceased, we would then submit proof of the death certificate. And if they are divorced, we would submit proof of guardianship to support the application.
So earlier, you talked about processing visas inside and outside country. So could you explain the differences between the two and why outside country can often be advantageous?
Sure. So if you're an individual that is a first-time visa applicant, then outside country will reduce the amount of processing time inside country until your Emirates ID is delivered. The reason for this is because the first two steps of the visa application are done prior to the individual entering the country. These two steps would consist of the issuance of the employment contract, as well as the issuance of the e-visa or entry permit that I previously discussed, which means all security checks are done before the individual enters the country.
Okay, yes, because I know with those checks, it can take quite some time.
Correct.
So I think, is it fair to say that the advantage is, you're not sitting in a hotel drumming up accommodation costs unnecessarily whilst you're waiting for those checks to come, so you come in a little bit later?
Correct. And if you are going to be sponsoring any dependents, it'll also reduce the amount of time until you're able to sponsor your dependents, as that Emirates ID is your key to settling in.
And, if you do apply from outside country, does that really speed up then things like the issuance of the Emirates ID, for example?
The reason why it does expedite it is it just expedites the processing time inside country. If we look at a standard visa application process that takes 4 weeks as an example, if you do an outside country application, the first 2 weeks are done prior to your arrival, whereas if you initiate the application while you're inside country, those 4 weeks are completed while you're inside the country.
Okay, great. Okay, well, look, I think that covers, for most part, the employment visa through that corporate sponsorship. But now let's move on and look at the self-sponsorship programs. And, particularly since COVID times, we have seen a raft of options when it comes to self-sponsorship, the best one being the golden visa, and I think, can you maybe take us through what makes that such an attractive option for long-term residents and indeed investors?
Sure. So the reason why the Golden Visa program is becoming so popular at the moment is your residence visa is issued for 10 years. So you're not going through the hassle of completing the medical fitness test every 2 years like a standard visa holder would. You're self-sponsored, so you're not dependent on your employer for your visa sponsorship, and it also gives you a few more advantages, such as only required to enter the country once every 12 months for the visa to remain active. And then also it gives you more benefits when it comes to sponsoring dependents. You can sponsor an unlimited amount of domestic staff, and it also allows you to sponsor your male children up to the age of 30.
Okay, so there just seems to be an awful lot of upsides to this golden visa. But maybe, there are three main categories of golden visa. So we have our fixed deposit, there's your property investment, and also there's the professional eligibility. Could you take us through each of those categories, please?
Sure. So I'll start with the professional category golden visa, as this is the most common for existing residents. The professional category golden visa is specific to individuals that are already living and working in the UAE. The requirements would consist of your basic salary must be at least 30,000 dirhams or more on a monthly basis. You would need to have an attested bachelor's degree. Once that bachelor's degree has been attested and translated into Arabic, you would also need to undergo the additional equivalency certificate process. Once the equivalency has been done, we would also need to keep in mind that the individual must be employed with the same business for at least 2 years and be able to show at least 6 salary payments into their local bank account.
And can you maybe just explain a little bit more about equivalency? What exactly is that?
Sure. So the equivalency is actually a recent requirement that came into place around 18 months ago. This is when the Ministry of Education in the UAE will actually reach out to the university where the individual studied to ensure that their bachelor's degree is equivalent to what a bachelor's degree is recognized in the UAE.
Okay. And as a professional golden visa holder, what happens then if you lose your job or, you want to move employer? what happens then?
Sure. So this is one of the reasons why the professional category golden visa is so common at the moment, is it gives you that flexibility. So should you lose your job or decide to change employers, your residency is not affected. Once you have obtained the professional golden visa, your employer actually needs to cancel your existing residence visa for the golden visa to be issued, and then a new application for a work permit to be attached to your visa is what is applied for you to remain employed. So when you lose your job or you are changing jobs, just the work permit is cancelled.
Okay, so then another benefit for employers to hire people on golden visas, as there's only one step.
Correct. You'll be saving on the visa costs, and a lot of jurisdictions give you different options for work permit validity. You can look at a 1 year, 2 year, and even up to a 5 year.
Okay, great.
Work
So there's a
permits.
number of options there.
Yes.
Okay, so then maybe let's move on to the property investment then. What are the requirements there when it comes to obtaining the golden visa?
Sure. So again, each emirate will have different requirements for the property golden visa. If we look at Abu Dhabi to start off with, the requirement is that your property must be valued at 2 million dirhams or more per applicant. So if you and your wife co-own a property, the property should be valued at 4 million for you both to qualify for the golden visa. Abu Dhabi has that requirement that your property must be handed over at the time of your golden visa application, and at least 2 million must already be settled for you to qualify.
Okay.
If we look at Dubai has eased a little bit on the requirements for foreign nationals. The property again must be valued at the 2 million for you to qualify. However, they do accept off-plan properties as well as financed properties. So you don't have that additional requirement that the 2 million must already be settled for you to qualify.
Okay, and can I just clarify a few things on the value of a property in order to qualify? So you mentioned, that if a husband and wife jointly own the property, that the value of that property must be 4 million. If that means if they were to get a golden visa each, so they would each have their own self-sponsored visa. But if that property sits somewhere between 2 million and 3.5 million, then one of them could get the golden visa but sponsor the other. Is that correct?
Correct, yes. So I always make this very clear when speaking to clients that if the property is valued at less than 4 million, that only one of the individuals should be listed on the title deed. And then once the primary visa has been issued, we can then do the dependent visa application.
But let's say two brothers, two sisters, they want to buy an investment property for the golden visa. Then the value of that will have to be at least 4 million, and they would have to be joint owners on the title deed to qualify.
Yes, that's correct.
Great. So, and what happens if you sell that property? Do you lose the golden visa then?
Yes, so this is very important, is that for the property golden visa category, your visa is always linked to the property. So should you sell that property, the land department normally gives you a grace period of 30 to 60 days to link a new property. If you're unable to link a property, then the golden visa will be cancelled.
Okay, all right. And then finally, let's look at the fixed deposit. How do you obtain that? What do you need to do to qualify for the golden visa?
Sure. So very similar to the property investment category, your investment here is 2 million dirhams. The difference is that 2 million dirhams is placed in a fixed deposit with a local bank. So the local bank will require you to open a bank account, a savings account, where the 2 million dirham will be deposited, and the bank will then secure the funds into a fixed deposit for a period of 2 years. After 2 years, that deposit will be recurring for an additional 2 years until you remove the funds.
Okay. And when you remove the funds, then do they have to be rolled on for another 2 years to get another, to keep that active, or can you withdraw?
Yes, so as it stands at the moment, Dubai government does allow for the individual to apply for a no objection letter after that 2 year period, which will then enable the individual to remove the funds. and the visa will remain active for the full duration. However, it is important to note that rules and regulations are forever changing, so it could possibly be that this requirement will change in the future.
Yeah, very important point. Okay, and if I can then, can we move on to the retirement visa? And, this was launched quite a number of years ago, but it's just maybe in the last 2 to 3 years that we've really seen an uptake in this category. So who is eligible for that, and, what are the key pathways to qualify?
Sure. So the retirement visa program is specific for individuals that are 55 years old and older. Very similar to the Golden Visa program, there are 3 main categories. The retirement visa is a 5-year visa program. So with half of the 10 years, it's half of the investment. So we're looking at the property category specifically. The property's value would be 1 million dirhams in order to qualify, with all the same qualifying requirements that we previously mentioned for the Golden Visa. Abu Dhabi, that 1 million must already be paid and the property should be handed over. For Dubai, it can be financed and the property can be off plan. When we look at the fixed deposit category, the investment is 1 million dirhams, but the difference here is that the period is 3 years that the fixed deposit would be in place. And then what's becoming very popular now amongst my clients is the professional, or what I call the income category for retirement visa holders. And this is where you're able to show that you are consistently earning a monthly income of, in Abu Dhabi, 20,000 dirhams or more. If you process the application through Dubai, it's 15,000 dirhams or more on a monthly basis. It does not have to be an income that's received in the UAE. So this could be a pension fund that you're receiving monthly. It could be dividends on investments that you have. It could be properties that you own that you're renting on a monthly basis. As long as we're able to show that income coming in monthly, we're able to apply for the retirement visa.
Okay, great. So, I think both the retirement visa and the golden visa, they sound like, great visa options for people. But I think in both of those cases, depending on which one you choose, what about medical insurance? Is it a requirement? What is it like as, a retiree is potentially older and that? How difficult is it to obtain that medical insurance?
Yeah, so although the medical insurance is not mandatory for the visa to be issued, it's always highly encouraged to every visa applicant that they obtain a local medical insurance. Abu Dhabi, it is mandatory to show that proof of medical insurance for visa issuance, whereas in Dubai it's not. But healthcare can be very expensive in the UAE, so it's always a cost or an expense that I recommend to my clients to investigate before applying for the application, because should something happen, you want to make sure that you are covered.
Okay, great. Okay, if I can move on then, please, Kelly, and if we could look at, we often hear people talk about a freelance visa and we hear them talk about a freelance license. And I think there can be a lot of confusion about what each of those means. Can you explain what that difference is, please?
Yes, of course. So if we look at a freelance license, there are different jurisdictions where you can apply for such license. Normally, depending on the jurisdiction, they'll have certain categories or boxes that you would need to fit in to be able to apply for the license. Whereas if we're looking at a freelance visa, this is a term that most people can relate to. But what we see in practice in the UAE is that it's normally visa outsourcing companies that are marketing a visa that permits you to be sponsored by that entity, and they provide you with a unique work permit. And it's that work permit that then enables you to freelance under their license.
Ah, okay. So then does every freelance license automatically come with a visa quota?
No. So the freelance license would then be issued, and then you would need to apply for an establishment card or an e-channel card, depending on the jurisdiction. And then you would need to get a visa that is linked through the e-channel card to the license.
Okay, so in that instance then, who would you say that the freelance route is most suitable for?
Sure. So I would always conduct an assessment first to get an idea of what are the activities and the purpose that they'll be using the license for. If you're someone that has a requirement to work with government entities or to be mobile in practice, then normally the freelance visa would be the best route because the visa is issued through a mainland entity. So it gives you that flexibility to work across the country. Whereas if your requirement is to have an online payment gateway or you're working remotely from home, there's no requirement to be mobile, then the freelance license is a good option for you.
Okay, and actually you touched there on the remote, working remotely. So, I mean, we're very lucky here in Dubai. The sun shines daily. It's very, very safe. Everybody has a great standard of living. If there were people looking to come here and work on a remote basis, what does that look like and who exactly would qualify for such a visa?
Yes, so the remote, or some people refer to it as the digital nomad visa category, came into effect during COVID. It's very important to note that this visa is residency only. It does not give the individual the right to work in the UAE. It gives you the right to live in the UAE but continue to work remotely for an employer outside the country. So it's important that you have an employer outside the country where you're able to submit an employment contract. The requirement normally is that the employment contract be valid for 12 months or longer. You need to have a minimum salary of $5,000 or the equivalent to apply. It is a 1-year residence visa only. It does give you the option to sponsor dependents, but the visa is not renewable. So that means every year you would need to cancel the visa and reapply. So it's not recommended for long-term purposes, but for someone that's looking short-term to work remotely from the UAE.
Okay. And then maybe lastly, just one other category that we see from time to time, which is the mission visa. When should a company or even an individual consider using a mission visa instead of going the route of a full employment visa?
Sure. So just to highlight, the mission visa is a short-term digital visa that gives the individual the right to work. So there is a work permit attached to it. It is issued for 90 days and it is single entry only. So normally amongst clients, I would say this visa quite common if you are looking to possibly offer a full-time employment to an individual, but you want to bring them over for 3 months to trial them in the market before offering that full-time relocation. Or perhaps you're looking to deploy employees to the UAE for a short-term assignment.
Okay, so very suitable then for the project-based work.
Correct.
Are there any limitations or restrictions that come with that visa?
Yes, so it is single entry only. The individual won't have the right to travel in and out of the country, and it cannot be converted or extended. So once that visa has reached the full 90 days, the individual must exit the country and then re-enter on a different visa should they possibly get a full-time opportunity.
Okay, great. Well, that brings us to the end of our conversation on UAE immigration. We've covered employment visas, self-sponsorship programs like the Golden Visa and the Retirement Visa, as well as additional options like remote work visas and mission visas. A huge thank you to Kelly for sharing her insights with us. And if you or anyone you know considering relocating to the UAE, I think understanding the pathways and what is available is absolutely key. And if you'd like to learn more about that, we'd love to hear from you. You can get in touch with us via our website, eerme.com, or you can contact us at info@eerme.com. Thank you.